So let's start with a bit of historical background. What's important to understand about the creation of UNRWA is that it was created with the clear understanding at the time of creation that it is temporary. At the time that UNRWA existed, for example, there was another refugee agency taking care of refugees in Korea as a result of the war there. And throughout the 50s, the agency did very well, resettled, integrated everyone, and was able to declare after a few years success and close down. The thinking was, when UNRWA was established, that this would be a similar trajectory. A temporary agency operating for a few short years with the specific purpose that was in its mandate to provide relief and works in a way that would allow those who were displaced by the war to be integrated into the local economies and no longer be in need of any kind of assistance. That was the vision, and that was the mandate. This is also the reason why, when the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was established, UNRWA was taken out, because the thinking was that it would be temporary, and therefore it's okay to say that people who are currently being taken care of by another agency will not be taken care of by UNHCR. So those are the technicalities. Now the politics, which is where it really matters. As I'm sure you very well know, the Arab countries opposed partition by the United Nations. To their credit, at least at the time, they were very clear about it. They have since learned to mask their intentions, but at the time they were very clear and made it clear that they do not accept the legitimacy of a Jewish state in any borders, and if the partition plan passes in the United Nations, they will oppose it violently with war, as indeed they did. They lost that war of annihilation. Israel emerged as an independent country, and Arabs who were displaced by the war came ultimately under the care of UNRWA. The Americans, the British, they thought UNRWA would be a temporary agency. Those displaced by the war, especially given that they were of the same language speaking, literally of the same kind of geographical, ethnic makeup of Jordan, of Syria, would be integrated into those local countries. And the thinking was, bring people who worked on the New Deal, Tennessee Valley Authority, they would bring big projects, and the issue would be over. Arab countries and the Arabs who were displaced themselves opposed anything that would not be the erasing of the outcome of the war. And since the Arabs failed to stop partitions in the United Nations General Assembly, failed to prevent Israel from emerging by means of violence and war, the new means that emerged, among others, wars and terrorism and economic boycotts would also be at play, but this became a central means of saying, we now have this idea of return, that the Arabs would return into what became the independent state of Israel, thereby erasing the entire Zionist project that emerged against our will. And they made it very clear that this was not a human right, this was not some benign idea, this was a hostile form of return. This was a warfare, was another element of continuing the war. This was war by any other means. And as a result, it has no parallel, because what they were asking is the return of a minority group for the purpose of turning the majority in the country into a minority. This has zero parallels in any other situation. So this is the background. And this is the reason when a few years later, the United States and the UK decide that they want to close down the agency because they see that the Arabs, both those displaced and the countries, refuse to cooperate, they want to close down the agency. They're saying the agency is not achieving its purposes. Let's close it down. The Arabs make it very clear. This is the era of the Eisenhower Doctrine, an American president who thinks that appeasing the Arabs will get him somewhere. It didn't work then, never worked since. But this is the idea with the Eisenhower Doctrine. And the Arabs made it clear that if America closes down UNRWA, there will be serious consequences. It's a Godfather-like statement and threat. And from that moment on, the United States and the UK and many other Western countries decide to basically appease the Arabs by means of regular payments to UNRWA. They know that UNRWA is literally achieving none of its goals. It is not operating according to its mandate. The mandate was to make itself unnecessary, not by means of resolving the conflict, but by means of making the people independent and integrated into the local Arab economies. So it was clearly a failure. The United States knew that, the UK knew that, and they decided to continue paying for it as a form of appeasement. From that moment on, the payments to UNRWA become essentially automatic, and Western countries look the other way. From that moment on, UNRWA really becomes the place where the Palestinian national identity is born. They think of it. These are ex-territories. People get free housing, aid, and you have the establishment of the entire social structure of a country. Education, healthcare. This is the first time that Palestinians have education that tells a Palestinian story rather than a pan-Arab story. And it is no accident that in the next few years, the terrorists of the Munich massacre, the greatest attacks, terrorism, emerge from the camps. Those become the places that create and help establish a revengeful kind of Palestinian identity that is all about erasing the state of Israel through this idea of return, which again is war by any other means. This has been allowed to continue for decades. As a result, we stand today with over 5 million people who are awarded by an agency that has the letters UN in it. And in parentheses, initially the name of the agency, because it was going to be some temporary thing, was going to be something like REWA, R-E-W-A. But the Arab countries insisted it would include the letters UN so that it would convey a message that the world is behind the Arab idea of hostile return into the state of Israel. And that's where we find ourselves today. The Arab Palestinians believe, and I believe they're right, that the fact that there is a UN agency that is regularly and annually supported at over $1 billion by countries like the United States, Canada, Europe, UK, Australia, that actually means that when they dream of return, it's not just a personal thing, but it is a globally sanctioned right. That's what they believe. And the truth is that literally no one has taken the effort to say that that is not the case. So the problem we have with UNRWA is that it uses the thin facade of we provide social services to those in need, humanitarian aid, but literally there would be no need if there was not an agency that created the need. It's not an earthquake. It is a political program and plan to perpetuate the notion that there is a need. So it is a thin facade of a need, And behind that, what we have is a clear political program to keep alive the idea, which is the most fundamental idea of the Arab and Palestinian ethos when it comes to Israel, that Israel is temporary. And because Israel is temporary, Palestinians can persist for second, third, fourth, and fifth generations in believing that they can return. I want to mention Adi Schwartz here is my remarkable colleague in researching and writing a book on the issue. And one of his beautiful insights was that he found that when the Palestinians speak of return, it is not just return physically to Lod or Ramle, it is a return in time. It is also a temporal return, not just a physical return. It is the idea that you can return to a moment before this abomination called the State of Israel came into being. And we literally have an agency with the letters UN supported by Western countries that keeps this idea alive. Now, people sometimes say that the Palestinians will always dream of it. And I say, yes, we will not take that dream away. They can continue dreaming. The problem is that they believe that the world is with them. And we need, and I come from the left, I am a dyed-in-the-wool, divide the country, 67 lines, divide Jerusalem, but even me, I put the line at national suicide, where kind of the Jews are done being in the business of national suicide, and the idea that they will become a minority, a Jewish minority in an Arab state, is not acceptable. I love it when people say that Arab leaders accept the two-state solution. Very few people have an understanding of the conflict to realize that when an Arab leader says, I accept the two-state solution, I recognize Israel, but at the same time they say, the right of return is holy, it's individual, it belongs to every Palestinian for generations, and it is never to be negotiated away. No leader can ever negotiate away what belongs to every individual in perpetuity. So when an Arab leader says that, and literally every Arab and Palestinian leader says that, the only two states they are really envisioning is an Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, and another Arab state that will supersede Israel within the Green Line. Those are the two only states that they can envision. So people who actually care about peace, people who actually care about the idea that we will finally have to divide the land, should see it as their interest, and this is why I devote my time to it, to really ultimately get the Arab Palestinians to understand that they do not have the support of the world in their maximalist delusion that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They do not have support for the idea that they can make claims on Israel west of the Green Line in the form of this idea of return. And this is why I think it's so critical to highlight the issue of UNRWA. What the American president has done is an important first step, but I think the way forward is not to just hold out the funding until the Palestinians come back to the table, because if you actually want to promote peace, funding UNRWA doesn't make sense in any context. The organization has to be completely dismantled so that the biggest obstacle to peace, the one that nurtures decades of Palestinian maximalism, is removed. Then maybe we can begin to imagine a partner on the other side that understands that they cannot have it all, just as we cannot have it all. So let me use that as a kind of introduction to the broader politics, and I'm happy to address any specifics.
When you said that the US and Great Britain wanted to close the agency, when was it?
1959. We're beginning to talk from the mid-50s until the end of the 50s, when America basically caves into our pressure under Eisenhower. From the mid-50s, you have heads of UNRWA who are saying, look guys, this isn't working. We're not getting any cooperation, so this is not working, and it's an utter waste of our time. And from that moment on, this is also when UNRWA begins to change its mandate to provide schooling and healthcare. We heard about clinics and micro loans. The claim that any of this is in the mandate is entirely false. None of this is in the mandate. The mandate is a temporary mandate for providing relief and works in the spirit of a committee that existed, it says it in the mandate, which talked about rehabilitating those displaced by the war in their place. So the mandate doesn't include any of these things. I have a colleague who said that after World War II, two refugee agencies were established. One was a tremendous success and one was a huge failure. He says, look, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee started out at the end of World War II with tens of millions of refugees roaming across Europe. Today, none of them are refugees. A huge failure. UNRWA started with 700,000. Now it can proudly boast of 5.2 million. A bureaucratic success if you ever had one. So this whole notion that UNRWA has a mandate that is set in stone, that is only until there is a just and durable solution. And in parentheses, first of all, this is not in the mandate. And when Palestinians use the word just solution, just so you know it for any context, the Arab Peace Initiative, anything else, when Westerners hear just solution, they think, okay, you'll get a Canadian citizenship, you'll get compensation for the home you lost, that's just. When Palestinians hear just solution, there is only one form of justice, which is the erasure of the state of Israel and this temporal and physical return. So when people use justice, it's a great word to convey to the Westerners what appears like a very moderate view, but which Arabs and Palestinians read only in one way. So the idea of a just and durable solution is a very clear message to Arab Palestinians, which the West doesn't correctly interpret. And in any case, it's not in the mandate. The mandate, again, makes very clear that it's temporary. And in fact, UNRWA could have declared, if it wanted, if it didn't go native, could have declared success numerous times. For example, in the 60s, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees, having been educated, got great jobs in the Gulf. UNRWA never took a single one of them off its books. It could have said, look, they're integrated, great success, we're done. In Jordan, they are citizens. They are citizens. By the way, for a nice reason. Jordan, as I'm sure you know, the Hashemite family was always the one willing to be the most favorable to Zionism. They had a different view that Zionism was a force for good in the region since the days of Faisal. So actually Jordan, after the war, was the only Arab country that was willing to actually make true peace with Israel. And they didn't demand return. This was another beautiful insight of Adi, that the country that was willing to make peace with Israel is the one that didn't demand return. Those that demanded return were the ones that refused peace. So return was established from the beginning as a clear warlike hostile mechanism. Jordan was willing to end the war, make the ceasefire lines of the West Bank a final border, and therefore gave citizenship to the refugees. It would have been a kind of India-Pakistan situation, and this is why Abdallah was murdered, and ever since Jordan has been very careful. But they are citizens in Jordan. Another example, in the West Bank, they live in the Palestinian Authority. Certainly by their accounting, and many of the world's countries, they live in Palestine. If they live in Palestine, why are they refugees from Palestine? Which Palestine are they refugees from if they were born in Ramallah, lived in Ramallah, never displaced an inch by war? Well, the Palestine that will one day supersede Israel. But if UNRWA wanted, it could have said, look, in the Palestinian Authority, they have a schooling system, they have a healthcare system. As part of the state-building efforts, we're turning over the schools and the healthcare to the Palestinian Authority, and we're out. It doesn't make sense to keep the idea for someone who was born in Ramallah that he's a refugee from Palestine. So we're out. East Jerusalem, this is one of my favorite absurdities. In East Jerusalem, there are tens of thousands of registered refugees. They actually have the right of return. I know this was not the Israeli intention, but by annexing East Jerusalem, they essentially gave them the right to go and settle anywhere in Israel. So they have a right of return, right? Again, that was not the Israeli intention, but for all intents and purposes, they have the right of return. You don't see UNRWA saying, we're out of East Jerusalem. The Palestinians there can get schooling and healthcare from East Jerusalem, and they can go live in Lod and Ramla, if that's where their great-grandparents are from. You don't see UNRWA under any conditions saying, we're out. So it's not true that their mandate is fixed in stone until there is a just and durable solution. They have multiple ways to say, our job is done, and they have refused to do so because they are committed to the Palestinian story of return.
Ben?
UNRWA said that UNRWA was central in creating Palestinian identity. So would you say that if UNRWA would have ended its activities decades ago, then we would have had in fact less or no terrorism and would already have reached peace? UNRWA is the central obstacle to peace.
So there are, and this is again another of the discussions we had in the book, there are basically three legs to the Palestinian national identity. One is Zionism, obviously. In the absence of Zionism, it would not have emerged. The other is Arab rejectionism. If Arab countries had agreed to support partition, had agreed to absorb the refugees, we would not have seen, for example, if Jordan had been allowed to end the war, make peace, we would not have seen the emergence of a separate identity. And UNRWA is the third leg. And this, again, was something that we realized by working on the book. We realized how central UNRWA was in creating the territory, the space. Think of the fact that you had young men who had free housing, healthcare, education. They were educated in a Palestinian story, which didn't exist before, one that suddenly had timelines like the Balfour Declaration and partition. And all of these things together created not just a separate national Palestinian identity, it created a Palestinian identity with a very specific nature, one that is revengeful, angry, seeks retribution, seeks the annihilation of the state of Israel, that conceives of justice as an annihilationist form of justice. This is not a necessary development of history, but UNRWA very much contributed to the ability to tell and to create that kind of identity. Any student of nationalism knows that healthcare and education and the entire social system of every country play a major role in establishing the solidarity and the sense of being a people. And what you had in UNRWA is, first of all, the territory. The refugee camps were ex-territory. So countries like Jordan that had no interest in supporting a separatist Palestinian identity had to deal with the fact that within their place, there was an ex-territory where this identity was developing. So all of this was taking place, and it is, and to me that was a tremendous revelation of the book, that UNRWA is not just an annoyance and something that perpetuates a conflict, but something that actually should be considered one of the major contributors, not just to the creation of a separate Palestinian identity, but to the nature that that identity had developed over time.
Yeah, we just, David Devine with the Israel Resource News Agency at the Center for Near East Policy Research, our focus is on what do you think of the concept of donor countries holding back, not suspending, but holding back aid to schools which are encouraging war? Now
So I used to be the chair of the Israeli Education Committee in the Israeli Knesset, and one of the favorite things that politicians love to talk about in education committees and parliaments are school books. Why did you write that, and why didn't you write that? It's a lovely topic. As a chair of the Education Committee, I always argued that it is about the most insignificant topic in education, in any education. The reason being that I'm sure as parents, and if any of you have ever been teachers, the actual connection between what is in a textbook and what's in a child's head, I think is very, very small. Even if we were to give tomorrow to all the teachers of UNRWA, all the 30,000 various employees of UNRWA across the Middle East, if they were to receive what we say in Hebrew, Mikraot Yisrael Lekita Aleph, the classic Israeli Zionist textbook for first graders, it would not change anything. First of all, they would take the book, they would close it aside, and they will say, and let me tell you about the orange groves we had in Jaffa. Because the teachers are Palestinians. The teachers are part of the ethos of the Palestinian temporal and physical return. And one of the reasons, and I know, David, you focus on that, and I understand the value, it's a way to expose the ethos. But one of the things that I've realized is that a lot of people who don't want to deal with the repercussions and consequences of coming to terms with the depth of the Palestinian maximalist vision, of Arab rejectionism. People who don't want to deal with the implications of what that means for the possibility of peace, for the policies that need to be taken for peace, they find it as an easy way out. I've met with numerous members of Congress, and as I would enter the room to raise the issue of UNRWA, they would say, oh, we know, we're dealing with the textbooks, we're on it, it's fine. And it gives them a way to feel good, that they funded a new curriculum, and why is the curriculum not there? My argument is that if we want to withhold money for something, which is my recommendation, it would be to withhold the money, and I agree with you, withhold it, not completely take it off the table, in return for the gradual dismantling of UNRWA. So, for example, one recommendation we have, start with the Palestinian Authority. In the Palestinian Authority, I think there's about 70 schools, I don't remember, tell them this: for every 10 schools that the Palestinian Authority takes over from UNRWA, which means take down the sign, put up your sign, the teachers who are currently working in the school, same teachers, move to employ them under the Palestinian Authority. For every 10 schools that move to the Palestinian Authority, you will get another tranche of funding until UNRWA is out of the West Bank and the entire provision of schooling and healthcare services is by the Palestinian Authority. I believe the same thing should happen in Jordan. It's more sensitive, should be done more discreetly. But again, how do we work with the government of Jordan so that the money goes to the government for the provision of services to its citizens, and UNRWA is gradually taken out of the picture? This is the process that I would envision, holding out the money, but not for reforms of textbooks, but for a grand dismantlement that basically says we, the United States, will no longer stand behind an organization that works directly counter to the United States policy of trying to make peace in the Middle East. And I'll end with this complete insanity. I sometimes like to say to Western diplomats that if your policy on the settlements looked like your policy on UNRWA, it would be this. You know what, settlers? Go ahead, settle any way you want. It's a final status issue. We don't want to prejudice a final status issue, so go do whatever you want. You know what? We're going to give $1.5 billion to build those settlements. And you know what? We trust you that when the day comes to negotiate a peace agreement with the Palestinians, you will do so in good faith and in a way that secures enough territory for a Palestinian state. I can assure you that all Western diplomats think this is highly absurd. I tell them that this is precisely what they're doing with UNRWA. They're basically telling the Palestinians, go on, persist in your delusion that Israel will one day be erased, that by this means of hostile and warlike return, you can turn back 70 years of the state of Israel. We'll contribute $1.5 million to you believing in that, generation after generation. We'll give you the international stamp of the UN so that you can feel that the world is really with you in this maximalist vision. But we really trust you that when the day comes to negotiate an agreement with Israel, you will do so in good faith and in a way that really recognizes the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their home. Those are the insane absurdities. We have a Western community that on the one hand says that it supports peace, that it supports both Jews and Arabs understanding that they will not have all of it, and on the other hand, they are funding an agency that leads the Arab Palestinians to believe that yes, one day they will have all of it. Thank you.